live now. Let's see what happens. But does it work? No. Now I should know. There we go. Just going to do an audio check quick. Okay. So it's been way too long since I've actually done something like this, and I'm going to do it live on camera because why not? I've actually already spoken on the tools to use roughly, so I'm not really going to go over that at all unless somebody pops into chat somewhere somehow, and I'm not really sure if multicasting is going to even work, so let's see what happens. Anyhow, as always, I start off with a date. Doesn't really matter, but I need a way of telling each of these segments apart. So date and number, and the reason I'm doing the date in that format is so that it's sortable. Year, month, day, actually you can sort by file name, or in my case, I take every one of these pieces, whether or not I publish them, whether or not I actually narrate them, and I scan in the page so that I can make a backup, and having just date references makes life really easy, finding stuff, etc. And page number as usual. There has been maybe twice in the last 4 years where I've actually done 2 pieces in a day, and they were really little, so I mean it's not particularly impressive, but I ended up doing like B, so it would be like 2019 04 11B, etc. So that's probably never going to happen. And I think the way I numbered it, I do like 11.1, 11.2, etc. 11.1 page 1, etc. So as before, I can start off with something random, and it doesn't really matter what. I've had the habit of creating these with a very specific science fiction idea in mind, and it's just kind of to honor an upcoming game and kind of explore certain kinds of ideas, but I probably don't need to. I probably shouldn't actually do that. Maybe if Solid Lore comes out, which I haven't checked, but is probably going to come out eventually. Okay, so do I really have to think? Oh, maybe I should bring my mic over here so I can be heard a little bit better. Do I really have to think about what I do? What do I start with? I can look around the room and I can look at all the objects and I can be like, maybe I can write a story about earplugs. So I've got one over there, or like a dust rag, or some piece of computer stuff that I've got here. I mean, I'm thinking maybe the glass here, and I kind of already imagine where that can go. What other things can I think about? Actions like sleeping or sitting or what have you. My last little bit had some sitting in it, so it doesn't really matter. And everything like tone shouldn't matter either. Okay, so I'm going to start because I got a glass of water right here. Let's start with that. Okay. Fine. Glass of water. I'm already thinking like space station, space science fiction-esque stuff. I already had a bunch of that in my head even before writing here. So I'm kind of cheating in that I'm thinking ahead already, because I've got some experience with just in general having a longer version of the story in my head even as I begin. So it's like a piece of my mind is already reaching out, not exactly into plot, but into mood and location, stuff like that. So, like I said in my previous videos, really all somebody who's new would need to do is think of a word and then think about where does it go, what is it for, what does it look like, what does it feel like. So the fact that it was that I started with a glass, I could mean a cup, I could, and then what kind of cup, is it a teacup, or what goes in a teacup? Tea goes in a teacup, maybe not, maybe it's hot tea, fresh tea, cold tea, maybe it's something like an iced tea, which is like some places call it a sweet tea. Maybe it's just a dry cup that's dusty and stuff like that. So there's taking an object and then describing really what it's like and deciding where it is. And I'm kind of doing that here, but I'm thinking quite significantly far ahead. So I'm thinking, okay, well, that's kind of weird. I had in my mind almost something like a hamster, like a hamster feeder, where you got the little bottle of water and the tube and the little like ball on the end that they can lick and get water whenever they're like. And I'm thinking something kind of like that, or the equivalent would be there are actually, I wonder if they do it for dog bowls, but I mean, it's a pretty, not exactly technology, but it's the equivalent where you've got a bowl of water and a little tube in it, and it just keeps it full all the time. So I'm thinking something kind of like that. Why would you have something like that? Well, if water would need to be measured, if the rationing, for example, so a space station environment, some sort of survival focused environment would need to have rationing quotas type stuff for, you need to be so hydrated by a certain amount, but not too hydrated because we don't want to waste, or maybe it's somebody who is disabled and it's hard for them to do something like that. You've got some kind of machine that's taking care of this sort of thing. So, and that's an interesting thought for me to have, is what kind of person under what kind of circumstances would need to have help for something as simple as water. But I'm saying placed already, which means somebody has the ability to pick up and move the glass. I used glass, so maybe I do want it to be like an actual glass as opposed to a plastic cup or a teacup or something like that. So I've kind of constrained myself as to like what it's made of. So I mean, it's fairly heavy being glass as opposed to being, oh, I can't remember the name of the material offhand. I really should just Google stuff randomly whenever I've got ideas in my head like that. It is a double-walled glass. I can do this. Let us find out. So this is what I mean by double-walled glass. They are really, really light compared to like a regular glass. And well, maybe I should make you smaller. But what's it made of? Also called insulated glass. But they're actually made of really, really, really light material. And I don't care. Stop bothering me. What is it made of? Wow, fine, I have to be... Borosilicate, there we go. Borosilicate. Borosilicate is really, really light stuff. So I can get away with, if this is somebody who is, they need it refilled, but they have the ability to carry it and move a glass around, at least when it's empty. I can make it light. I can make it, I don't have to make it like a science fiction material and just be like, it's light. I can actually make it glass. I can get away with making it glass, and I can get away with making it light. Okay, so I've got an idea in my head already. Fine. I've got a dude of some sort who's sitting in a big chair, kind of comfortable. So why don't I mean, I don't intentionally think of characters in terms of their limitations. I don't normally care or explore this sort of stuff, but maybe I should. Let's make it a first. Oh, maybe I should put you back here. I already don't like that sentence. Oh, wow. I really don't like that sentence. It's not leading me anywhere. I wonder if I should have a light on. Maybe that'll look better. It actually looks better for my eyes out here. I use the word kept, so I want to talk about it being kept a little bit full. And I talked about how I kind of have to cram words in to use the width of the page, otherwise I'll run out of pages too quickly. Man or woman? I don't think. I'm going to make it a little old woman. Let's see. That works. Oops, I was going to say when it was full. Let's see, something like... Now I used the word station already, which kind of is unfortunate. I can say system. Yeah. This is the kind of thing that I'd end up changing if I ever edited my own work. Set to pour, yeah, pour. Kind of awkward. Okay, so I'm thinking little old lady, but she's independent enough that she wants to drink her own water. Um, I'm making somebody who's frail but not crippled. I'm making somebody who's like, one of the problems of somebody who's particularly elderly, for example, is that um, there are support structures which exist, which help somebody who is less able to help themselves. And so as age and need tends to come hand in hand. And so somebody who is frail for some reason, who for some things needs some help sometimes, there's a problem of the helper doing too much, and it's actually it's damaging to a person, because I mean, you're looking at somebody. So I can imagine like a 95-year-old woman, but she's like old school woman. So she's strong-willed, and you take somebody like that, and so maybe she has trouble like standing and walking around and going outside and doing stuff. So she needs help with some things, just physical reasons. But she's perfectly capable of doing some things as long as they are made to be as easy but no easier than necessary. Now, no easier than necessary is really important for somebody who's particularly old, because taking away their like their sovereignty, their adulthood, their ability to just to function as an individual person who controls their own life, taking that away bit by bit isn't really good for a person's we can call it something like spiritual health, but for their psychology is not very good. So I have in mind already, kind of, even though I haven't said anything, I've already developed something in my mind of like a little old strong-willed woman. She would have been one of those like little you can imagine her as like a little girl being one of these kind of like I'm an adult. And I actually, from my previous exploration when I was talking about tools, I actually did go into like a little girl who was kind of insisting to grow up kind of on her own terms, and her dad was, he wouldn't, like, good parenting helps a child, doesn't force them down a particular path as such. There are certain things where obviously good parenting requires parenting, but there are certain things where if the little kid is doing something a little more adult, a little more strong-willed, they're kind of playing dress up with maturity. A good parent would just kind of like give them a little bit of space, not even give them advice necessarily, give them a little bit of space, but watch and make sure that everything is good and safe, and then let that kind of stuff evolve. So my last tiny little piece, which is, I don't know if you can even see it here, You can see a little bit of it back there. It only got that long, but it was like a couple of hours of talking. But I was talking about something else. It was prompting me to talk about other things, like I'm being prompted right now to talk about other things. So I can imagine like a little girl like that, and I can reuse some of the previous characters that I've kind of maybe half written on without necessarily having to connect the two pieces together. And it doesn't have to be like the previous one. It's just something in the past that I've fiddled with, and it helps inspire me right now. It's just like there's this notion that writers draw from their life experience, and that all the characters are really characters in their life or some aspect of themselves or something like that. And it's I mean, in a deterministic sense, it must be true, because we only understand what we understand based on our life experience. And maybe the soul or something like that, if you want to add something unique and non-deterministic into our ability to have free will, okay, cool. So yeah, I suppose somewhere in my life, the ideas of, obviously I was a kid, so I know some of it. I try to remember a lot of the personality and stuff like that, so I can draw from some of my understanding. But I've seen a lot of media that have a lot of these ideas in them, and I've talked with people and I've met people that have characteristics that I can draw from. I don't necessarily need or seek to be informed by my previous works, but I mean, it does happen. That's one of the things where if you were to find yourself lost in a particular kind of universe and you're ending up writing different characters in the same kind of world, you can just go with that, because if it's there for you in terms of like the mental environment, if that's what leaps to mind as you're working, just do it. This idea is just practice for storytelling, or practice for thinking, or what have you. Some people will do it for character building. Some people will do it to explore that kind of world. So they'll write more than one story intentionally to round out a particular world they have. And so for somebody like an author, where let's say they've written 2 books and they're in the same world, and it wasn't necessarily 2-part. It was just, there was one book, it was success. They made a follow-up book without necessarily intending, without making that the destiny of releasing the first one. There was a surprise success, surprise to them, and they're prompted to make another one to take advantage of that success, to roll with it, right? If you do something and people like it, and you do more of it. Why did I go down that road? So if that person like that could write around and around in the same universe of their first couple of books, in order to explore the things that they haven't considered. Like, you've got one of these stories that's about knights and dragons and kingdoms and stuff like that. Well, what would it be like for an everyday person? An everyday person, maybe they survived the disaster of the dragon, and this writer wants to get into the practice of understanding their own world by exploring things from the perspective of just an everyday person in that town that got ruined, and it was just like a footnote in the first book. Well, what would happen if that was explored a little bit? What would happen to the families? Was anybody killed? How did things change socially? Did they come together? Did they split apart into different towns? Did they go off to different families? Did the kingdom actually send help because they're of a certain sort, where they would go off and send armies to go and fight the dragon and its minions or something like that? But maybe they're also the sort where there would be some movement to go and tend to the disasters, to kind of help clean up after the wars. So it's possible for a writer to explore one existing universe, and just by writing little bits and pieces, and they happen to be practicing. So I could happen to be practicing, but if I'm thinking about something else that I've written on at some point, I could explore things from a different angle. And if that's what comes to a person's mind, if that comes to your mind while you're writing, then go and explore it. It's tempting to say, well, I've already written that before. And it's tempting to pull yourself away in order to like force yourself to be more rounded for different kinds of let's say different perspectives or different genres or different whatever. I can remember I challenged myself. My classic example is I decided that yeah, I could start with any word, anything ever. And so I started with orange. And I went with that, and it turned into a really, really nice science fiction story about an orange. And I often explore like the growth of a character, like the literal growth of a character from being young to being not necessarily old, but certainly older. So I could do the same thing here. I could imagine this set in an existing universe that I created at just the tiniest little fraction of at some earlier point. I could do that. I could intentionally do that, and if I found myself drawn to do that, I could pursue that, and it's perfectly healthy to do that because this is practice. Some people will insist that they need to practice by, well, day one should be a fantasy fiction, day two should be like a detective story, day three should be, high fantasy or science fiction or things like this, and they can decide that it is important for them to step out of their normal boundaries and explore something like that. And I understand that, I really do. And maybe it's just a different sort of person, and I'm not that sort. But I have pushed myself. I pushed myself to do something that was I was doing almost entirely science fiction, and I decided to explore fantasy fiction for a while, for just it's like 4 pieces or so, and it was really good. It kind of like was pulled out of my imagination in the exact same way as all of my other, I think to that date, almost everything was science fiction, and that just turned out to be like that. Like I like things, and I like machines and computers, and I love the idea of all these things, and I guess science fiction is just kind of there. But I've played a lot of tabletop role-playing games, like a variety of systems, like 20 or something stupid. And so I love the mechanics, and I love the fantasy world, and I liked it before it was cool, this kind of stuff. So maybe I've just drawn from that, and maybe I'm just trapped in those things, and maybe I should force myself into some other exploration, and I just haven't done that yet. But I mean, it doesn't necessarily matter if it's like, I could say, if you wanted to learn to do a thing, you should just do it even if it's wrong, as long as you do it every day. And if it's really important, like, I'm not doing this for a living, so it doesn't necessarily matter whether or not it's any good, whether or not it's particularly focused, as long as it's done. I get the feeling like expertise kind of like will creep up. And it's not exactly true for this, because the very first one I did, I liked. So I have bad taste, or I have been thinking about it long enough without doing it that I got kind of okay with it as soon as I decided to make it a thing. At any rate, so yeah, I've got this idea in my head. I don't think it's based on anything. Maybe it's based on kind of a version of the previous character I was exploring that just popped into my head. And I can choose to do that on purpose, or I can choose to say no, or I can say it doesn't matter. I'm never going to bring up that character's history necessarily. And you could say, well, maybe if a person, if some other person were to pick up this book and were to read from page 1 to the end, they would see a trend and they would make a connection. But I have no, that's an inevitability that somebody is going to decide to misinterpret things. There are just a lot of bad readers that will do stuff like that. And there's nothing I can do about it other than to say that that's an incredibly stupid way to actually read, that that's not actually how my mind works anyway. Each of these things is its own instance that doesn't necessarily have to build off of anything else. I won't even remember 2 stories ago. So what do I'm not, I mean, maybe it's just because I took too much of a break since the last time I've done something like this. Anyway, I should get back to it. But that's a perfect example of if you're the type, you might write a little bit, get kind of lost in some thinking. Some people will listen to music or will get up and pace around. But sometimes sitting down and just doing a thing for a while is really hard. And just don't either intentionally resist it, and this sitting it down and doing this for 20 minutes straight without taking a pause, that's practice for you getting your head in the game, so to speak. Or maybe this is just interesting and fun and take every break as it comes to you, but don't be too far from this because you get adorable little ideas that pop into your head. So literally pick this up and carry it around. And if you have thoughts, then opposite page, and just take whatever notes that happen to pop into your head. Maybe I should be taking some notes over here. So I know you can't read them, but so I can say little old lady. I can be like did I spell independent wrong? I think I spelled that wrong. Do I care? Yeah, I kind of care. Independent. Now, one of the tricks of writing good notes is just writing keywords. And you decide on keywords. They're a distilled version of a larger idea that you might have. And I guess it's something like the trick of being able to write good analogies or something like that. It's something that's going to have to come with practice. Like, your own mind. All you're trying to do is get an idea, stick it into a word, even if you don't necessarily use those words. It doesn't matter as long as it's there, so it doesn't fall out of your head. If you got a really good brain and ideas like these don't get lost, that's awesome. It must be nice. It must be nice. So as I'm writing, I could dump whatever notes happen to pop into my head over here. But it doesn't necessarily matter. That's not something I've ever really done. I might have done it with a couple of points in all of these years. Maybe I should make it a habit of doing it here because I'm talking about it. Okay, so I forgot what I wrote, so I'm just going to read it again. Okay, so I have automation happening in a machine. I've got her drinking herself. She's weak. Hey, I could immediately make it science fiction, say she's 200 years old, and that's why she's kind of weak. Do do I want to go? Let's not. I'm going to choose to not make it science. Make it. I'm going to choose to not make science fiction. Not make this story anything like that. I can set it in the here and now ish. Well, not in the here, but today ish. I almost never reference anything real here and now, just because the more real you make something, like the more now, the closer you make this, is the more important it's going to be to do your research. So if you're mentioning, so for example, if you're, even if it's a piece of fiction, if you're writing something that's if you're writing something, oh, there we go. If you're writing something that's like now-ish, and you're referencing things that are real right now, you have to have a level of accuracy with those things. And the more important it is, the more kind of prominent those elements are, is the more important it becomes to get it right, and perhaps even to add more detail to those things. So when you're writing something now, you're going to get the canon constraint. You're going to get pulled in, and you're going to get constrained to the need to be accurate, the need to be kind of thorough. And it gets even worse the more, so there's kind of a rabbit hole of a funnel of the more real a thing is, or needs to be, because maybe that's the target audience, or maybe that's the story for some reason. The more real it becomes, is the more and more sucked in the writer has to be for all the realistic elements. I wonder if I have it over here. Okay, I'm not digging it out, but I believe it was a Tom Clancy book. Again, I'm talking about something real. I should probably be accurate. Here we go. The Hunt for Red October. And this was... Yeah, it is Tom Clancy. Okay, so The Hunt for Red October had an earlier version of it. It was turned into a film with Sean Connery. And its original book was ridiculously technical. Like, really ridiculously technical. And it was cut back. It was still really technical. And I'm pretty sure I've got... It's somewhere. I've got a pile of like a literal pile of Tom Clancy books that are like that thick, each hardcovers, and I've just got a massive stack, and it's not even close to all of his works or anything. It was just there, and I'm like, I can barely lift that amount of books, but whatever, I'll give it a shot. I need to have it all. It was kind of cheap. Anyhow, that's an example of how he was setting something in the real world, so he had to have real things. He was setting something in an environment that, at least at the time, like this is 1984. This is 1984, and it was kind of, the climate was that there weren't any books like that. And you have to realize, like, the Cold War was still going, and that level of detail was very interesting. And maybe he thought it was just for a really small audience that would be highly interested in that. And maybe he felt that because it was a small audience and they maybe have maybe they knew a little bit about the topic already. He needs to be even more correct. And maybe because he was doing real world stuff, he would have to be fairly technical, fairly, like, really, really accurate. So he actually, as I understand, he, he really, really got into it. And his editor or publisher or whatever had him cut a lot of stuff back. And a lot of it stayed technical in the book. At least specific. So he got constrained by having it in the real world, by having it in a specific environment, that specific environment requiring an amount of technical background, and then that technical background requiring accuracy, and it goes on and on and on and on. So there's a massive amount of research that has to happen. So in it's fiction, but it has aspects of real life, so that although it's fiction, it requires research. Now, there's another kind of fiction, maybe I'm just being lazy, where it is entirely in the mind of the author and they can make up everything. But even then, you can't make up everything. And if some detail has to be important for some reason, then if some detail has to be important, then some level of research has to be done with it at some point. So for example, it's fantasy fiction. So, I can make up dragons and knights and stuff like that. But if I wanted to be specific about my knight donning armor, then I can take some guesses at things, or I can make it like almost not quite childish or anything like that, but I can make it, what would be the right way of saying it? I can make it almost like representative. I can make it really fast and loose, and I can say that the knight is dressing themselves. But if it's classic plate armor, that person needs help to put it on or to get on a horse or anything like that. They need like a special kind of there's a little winching system and stuff like that would help put a knight on a horse, and it would have to be a horse that's larger than the ones that are extant in our world. The absolutely astonishingly large horses, because they used to have been bred really, really big. We don't make them like that anymore. And if you think like if you've got mounted police or something like that, then that's nothing like what an actual war horse would look like. So if you're making a complete fantasy book, you might think that you are free from the constraint of technical accuracy, but it's not actually true as soon as you start making it important to get into that stuff. So if it's a kid's book or something like that, it may be important to either not have any of that in, just the armor is in a pile, the knight goes and puts on their armor and runs off down the stairs, hops on their horse and charges off to go and fight the dragon before it flies off into its cave. Like if you're imagining your audience is like 8 or something like that, and you need to just get it going and make it exciting, but if it's for an older crowd and you want to talk about and you want to teach like, oh, the armor is made of metal and it's heavy and it takes a long time, and you can paint a different kind of picture. That the armor, that the knight is sweating, trying to put on the armor as fast as possible, thinking that they'll get a rest while on the horse riding off, that they need to have the speed to get the armor on as quickly as possible because the dragon's going to get away, that they need to get help, that and it can be an avenue to explore a certain thing if you want to get away from completely untethered, unconcerned with realism, that kind of writing, and get more and more into the realism, the necessity of of realism will force you to have a certain kind of technical detail. So it's possible to just to slow things down and make things a little bit more detailed, more involving to read, and that requires a research. And it's possible to be fast and loose, and it is an unfortunate thing to think that a piece of fiction which has low resolution, low realism is for kids. It's kind of unfortunate that we have that kind of idea in mind, because really there is extraordinary value in having low resolution storytelling that exists for adults, and the adult side of things is, well, is kind of like moral tales that are extremely valuable for an adult, especially an adult who is being led to think about things in a completely alien way. And it is like that adult is letting themselves have a childish mind and exploring, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be a philosophical parallel to today, but there is a certain kind of storytelling that I imagine could exist directed towards adults that is building on something like mythology, because that's still fascinating for a lot of adults, is the romanticism of high fantasy, of low realism, of just the emotion or the action or what have you, where you just get all that stuff out of the way, and it's kind of like a kid's book for adults. I don't believe in treating the kid and the adult any differently, really, when thinking about low resolution. It sounds insulting to say low resolution. So when I say something like high philosophy or high mythology, I don't believe in separating like making classes of human. I think it's pretty universal that maybe I think of a mature child, like 9 years old. If I think of between 9 and 12 is about good human brain, between 9 and 12, I think that the interest that sort of person would have in reading exists right up until, right through adulthood. I think that that's still there, that it's possible to engage an audience and direct it and have in mind like a little kid, but have it perfectly interesting for adults who, you read fiction essentially for entertainment. And I think an adult is already putting their brain on hold. And I think that there is still a youthful passion in an adult reader that would accept low technical detail, that would accept just good storytelling as opposed to accurate storytelling. Which, good and accurate storytelling, I guess I can say, as opposed to good and inaccurate, or good and representative, or good and whatever. Anyhow, I was supposed to be writing, although with this I'm using this as a way of prompting me to talk about other stuff, I suppose, because I'm not necessarily just practicing with this, but I'm practicing with, for example, I'm live streaming this. Not that anybody's going to be seeing this necessarily. Okay, so where was I? Wow, I had already read this, and I lost my place. Okay. So I said I don't want to make her 200 years old. I don't want to make it science fiction. Do I want to think about accuracy? I've got a little bit of that already, because I'm thinking if she's being frail, and I'm thinking about how much she can carry. want to say as frequently as possible, as yeah, often. Now, so that's an example. That decision I just made, often or frequently, is an example of deciding on like rhyme when writing. So one of the important things about the flow of writing is to understand the reader's perspective when they are reading the work, which is you don't want every single sentence of yours to be like absolutely massively astonishingly long and tiring to read through, one sentence after another sentence after another sentence just being huge. And one of the interesting things that I have noticed is that because I narrate this stuff, I read it obviously, but I have to breathe and I have to read. And these sentences, if they are really, really long, then I will run out of breath. So it happens to have been a fascinating discovery that there is a link between writing and reading and narrating, such that I write a specific, there's a specific music to the writing of length, such that when I'm narrating it, I'm kind of forgiving on my own narration. And that just kind of, that never turned out. That's something I noticed after the fact. Like, the fact that I'm narrating hasn't changed the way I write, but I have noticed that when because I write based on what I like to read. So I've noticed that, so in my example here, the often is a small word that is easy to say. It's easy to say in connecting the words, the neighboring words. And if I made that too multisyllabic or too complicated, the music of that particular sentence would be off. I like almost writing in simple English. Simple English is a version of English. Here we go. Oh, fine. Oh, okay. Well, it's called Basic English, although there is Simple English Wikipedia. Okay, so Simple English is a constraint on the complexity of words. And it's kind of like a bridge language between something non-English to full English. It's kind of an intermediary. It tends to already be the instinct for people who are learning English to get ideas across as frugally as possible. And so Basic English is recognizing that's a thing, and then and then formalizing it, really defining the set of words. So for example, in Chinese, I looked into Chinese at significant length, and in Chinese, the language is now called Standard Chinese, and there's a ranking system such that they have groups of words that are necessary to memorize for each of the stages of testing to demonstrate it's most specifically for foreigners, but it is used locally as well. So there would be like a stage of testing to get certification to be at a certain competency for the language, and it exists. So, for example, if you were to become a written translator or a spoken translator for standard Chinese, you would have to have a certain rating level of having graduated from their standard system. Like there's literally an internationally distributed organization for specifically testing competency in standard Chinese. So a person who wanted to become a translator from whatever to Chinese would have to have a certain competency level in Chinese to be recognized, at least from that side of things. I don't know, because I haven't looked into translation, like live translation or written translation specifically, but maybe it's the exact same thing for something like English. So, so I probably wouldn't qualify because I couldn't tell you enough about the technical details in the language of how sentence structures work or stuff like that. So I'd have to like go and learn all that properly and learn better Chinese in order to become ranked appropriately, having graduated, so that my amazing like native English had the technical, I'd graduate from it, as well as learning and graduating from Chinese. At any rate, I was talking about the music of writing. So it turns out that the writing and the narrating and the reading have a kind of sameness, such that I can lower the technical. It's like I can make the breathing more constrained, and I can make the words simpler insofar as they have less syllables. So if I have choices between words, I will make an active choice. Well, it's been an instinct that I've just noticed now. I will make a choice for a simpler, sometimes more common word. The trap is that you must not make the writing seem like it's dumbing down your reader. And the more simple the language is the more difficult it becomes to avoid duplicating words all the time. So I don't even know if I can give an example in what I've already done here of dodging duplication. I think one thing is system that I want to, so system and station and stuff like that. In basic English, I'd probably use the exact same word multiple times because it's for the exact same like object in the room. I would call it one consistent thing every time. In more engaging writing meant for somebody who is more, let's say somebody who is more competent than just the basic English level, then I would get away with / really need to push that kind of skill level person up. I need to push them out of basic English into something closer to regular English. And I kind of imagine that my readers are like highly engaged 14-year-olds. And I mean, I haven't really worked through thinking that. But I don't consider it an insult to think of any reader who is interested in reading for actual entertainment as opposed to like studying literature. I don't think it's insulting to think of that person as being engaged like a youth. Like, I mean, I think it's like it's an aspect of a human that they lose if they choose to abandon the kind of brilliant curiosity, the kind of passionate, and there's still a kind of innocence in that youth. I think an adult should really hold on to that sort of thing, and that it's really important. And so I don't think that if I were to quote unquote like dumb down my writing, if I were to make it lyrical as opposed to technical, if I were to reduce my syllables, if I were to simplify things, I don't think that would be insulting an adult reader. I haven't really thought about that until kind of just now, but it's something. I mean, yeah, there's an idea in philosophies of having a childlike mind that maybe it's just not a thing for a lot of people, and I think that those people just aren't really interested in reading fiction anyway. They'd be more engaged by like movies and television and stuff like that. Whereas maybe it's a different sort of person that likes books, maybe likes books more than television, etc. Just likes okay, something I haven't really thought about at all. Anyway, I was supposed to be writing. This is a great example of me getting lost. Again, I don't care. This is about being prompted to talk as well as just writing. At almost 95, she still had all her youthful determination and insisted upon taking care of herself as often as possible. And it might be important for somebody as they're writing to actually read it or even read it aloud, depending on the kind of person you are. That might be embarrassing for some people, depending on their environment, if somebody else hears them. Try to push yourself. You know yourself and how you work. Okay. I could talk about her having nurses. I just wrote down nurses confused, and there's my ink. Yeah, anyway, that happens. Yeah, it would be worse if I were left-handed. Okay, at almost 95, she still had all her youthful determination and insisted upon taking care of herself as often as possible. I probably should have said insisted on. Again, I just wrote whatever the heck word came to mind because I got kind of lost while I was thinking about that sentence. Do I want to have like her daughter taking care of her? Her daughter would be like 30 years younger, so maybe that's not appropriate. Granddaughter? Why am I thinking of only having women in this? Like, why not? So there's about a 30-year difference between generations, or at least that's what I have in my head, probably because that's easy math. It's not really accurate, but if I'm thinking like 4 or 5 generations, 30 years is probably at the long end. So I could say that if she's 95, then her daughter would be 65, then her granddaughter would be 35, and that's a pretty good age to be a mature adult who cares. And the granddaughter, grandmother thing seems really nice. I kind of like that. There's a lot of caring, and I don't necessarily have to think in terms of like responsibility. I can just think of a relationship and feelings, and maybe build on a mood or something like that. There's only one D in granddaughter. Well, I'm making it 2 words. Well, I'm gonna. If I type this up, I type this up before I actually narrate it. It makes life easy. To actually read it in a big font. Notice how I put a mark between granddaughter because I mashed the 2 words together. That's just to remind myself. It's really tiny, not that you can necessarily see it. Right? I put a little dot there, And when I'm reading this again later, that's almost like a note to myself to notice that between space. It's going to be pretty obvious anyway, but there's me explaining my mind. I don't want to say mothering because it's a little weird. I want to talk about how her granddaughter was initially kind of confused or concerned, or she was not overbearing, but she was too helpful. And the words aren't in my head right now, so I kind of need to simplify the idea somehow of the transformation of the granddaughter from being like too nursey to more helpful, right? And to have the relationship go from one of effort, of purpose, to one of like participation and care and like the social connection. So I've got like the growth of the granddaughter kind of thing, because I kind of want the reader to learn the story arc. I want my reader to also understand that seniors are adults and should be treated as adults, not like children. I do want to say overbearing though. Let's say almost overbearing. Don't like it. I probably edit this if I edited things. Did I use the word help already? Okay, that she ought to help. Now, it's going to get difficult to refer to these. I have a problem with naming characters, and it's going to get more and more difficult to distinguish the grandmother and granddaughter without constantly referring to them as either she, she, her, etc., or as grandmother, granddaughter, the grandmother, the granddaughter. So maybe I have to give them names. I really hate giving things names. It's hard. One of the nuisances, I hate names so much because obviously names are connected to humans, to people out there, and possibly to readers or what have you. And I've only met so many people with so many names, and I don't want to use those names necessarily, because I don't need to be reminded of those people. And I almost imagine that everybody I have ever met would read this, and I don't want like my mental version of that person with that name thinking that they have been transformed into this character. But I just, do I want a random name generator or something like that? Like, is that a thing? Do I want to go and exploring? See? Oh. I hate... pick a name. Oh, no. There we go. Name generator. Quick name. What's a quick name? Rapper name? Cat name? Band name? Pirate name? How many examples would I like to generate? Birth year? What? Wait. Hey. What? Nationality? What do I care? Why? This is really cool. Flavor? Give me a zombie name. What's a good name for a zombie? Write me some names. Helen. That immediately popped out. That is an old Greek name, is it not? We can make her an old Greek woman. I've known some Greek women with some significant spirit and who are really active when they're older. I didn't even look at the rest of the names. Just the thing that popped out. I know the term pig-headed exists, but does the term bull-headed exist? Good. Yeah, my brain leaks out my ears. Yeah, okay. ANCE or ENCE? Again, it doesn't matter. Spell check can come one day later. I probably shouldn't have used the word machines. could go back and maybe edit that word. Maybe, because science fiction wise, I could literally turn the walker into a machine. I was actually thinking of using one of these like scooters. Maybe I should say that. That's kind of what popped into my head, but best to just write rather than lose the rest of the sentence, which I almost did. Ever had that vision, that imagination of the grandmother who's like, you come over and it's like she's always ready to have the company. And so you've got like the house that is just so, but it's just so in order to be incredibly warm and welcoming and comfortable. So like you'd be the little kid, and you go over to grandma's house, and it's her house because she's the one that takes care of it. And um and you're like, maybe you've got like, your little brother doesn't like it because he doesn't want to go out, doesn't want to get dressed, and he's got stuff he wants to go play with his friends or something like that. And you want to go and visit your grandmother because it's always wonderful and warm and welcome, and the food is really awesome, and it's just like, and it's just a great experience, such that when you get older and older and you get more detached from your parents dragging you out to go and see, that you start doing it on your own, and it gets to be so okay that you just kind of like show up to go and like spend time with grandma, and like just like talk about the stuff that might be happening in your life, and occasionally maybe embarrassingly ask for advice. It's just kind of like bring stuff up, and she'll say things, and you'll feel better. And it's you go over, and she somehow knows already, like grandma ESP knows when you're going to show up, and there's always just a little bit of extra. Oh, I made a little bit too much anyway, why don't you stay for lunch? And I'm imagining that kind of relationship happening between these two characters, and that it just became kind of a bond that happened between them, such that even though the grandmother is getting older and older and older and needs more help, that the daughter still comes to her, even though she's in her 30s, still coming to visit grandma, and there's still like a little spark of the child in her, and she wants to go and like visit grandma. And the reason that came to mind is I'm trying to imagine that the grandma has always loved having like kids around, and has always loved having these relationships around. And the grandmother will always have like, the house is just so, always. And the house is like I said, very welcoming. So you got this little kid who's like, grandma's house. And I'm imagining like private nursing care of some sort. Like she still has a home. Maybe she had to move so that she lives on the first floor or something like that. And the grandmother, Helen, still wants that environment to be just so. So she's like the bullheaded, she's the independent. And so I'm imagining her ordering her help around to do that. So even though it's not necessarily their job to go and like, maybe it's their job to clean, but it's not their job to adjust all the doilies just so, and to go and like bake a little bit. And then, so maybe there's the grandma experience is really infectious, and all the nursing staff, maybe there's somebody who's like living full time with her, and who's an actual helper, and maybe there are occasionally other staff that hover through to help with certain other regularly scheduled tasks, like actual significant house cleaning, or there's something like that. I'm imagining this woman like just having this mood such that the people that come in contact with her life end up getting that grandma experience from her, and now she's been orchestrating a kind of little colony of tendrils of grandma-ness out to infect these new little grandmas, to instill this spirit of grandma-ness, and getting all these people to come together to maintain the grandma house. And so when Helen's granddaughter goes to see her, that experience is still there. I don't know how to convey any of that, or even to distill that down into a couple of keywords, but let's give it a shot. Company was always appreciated, and bullheaded about her independence and preferred relying on machines like her scooter and water dispenser than on nurses or her granddaughter. The company was always appreciated, and awkward sentence. Aren't they all awkward because I'm talking at the same time? The company was always appreciated, and I can hear my birds chirping outside. It's distracting. Okay. And cool. Now, even though I have a much grander idea in my head, maybe I can hint at it. I don't think this would ever fall out of my head, such that if I were to read this in 10 years, I'd probably get some of that feeling back. I'm going to write a little bit more on that to see how far I can extend this idea, if I can get it more solidly in here. But even if I don't flesh it out 100%, I'm gonna the idea of the welcoming grandma's house concept, I don't think that's going to leave me, so that if I hint at it a bunch of times here, it's going to come back, so that if I ever come back to this and like wanna, maybe I'll make a thing in my twilight years to go back through my old writing and read it all and edit it or whatnot. Who knows? Let's see. Talking had me distracted as well. That's so annoying. Oh, I talked about this. It is annoying. Yeah, the other thing that I do is I twiddle, which is, I can't do either when I'm using one of these other pens. Man, I keep wanting to use the name Julie for some reason. Maybe I, because I want to focus on Helen, maybe I should just talk about that, but I actually want to talk about the granddaughter now. Um, yeah, fuck, why do I always want to use the name Julie? And I shouldn't have sworn there. Um, wow. Okay, so this is not the case in all places in all times, but there was a time when you could imagine that a 12-year-old could hop on public transit and go and visit the grandmother on their own. Nowadays, and maybe parents wouldn't be comfortable with that, depending on where a person is or how their transit works or whatever the heck. But I can say this was 60 years ago. And again, it doesn't have to be here and now. I'm going to try not clicking this anymore. I don't know how annoying that is. Wow. Okay, you know what? I'm already burnt out and I want to stop. How long have I been streaming this? Okay, so I've done enough and I've got the mood in my head. I can write a couple more notes here. Okay, so I can write a couple of notes, and part of the magic of this is I can pause or stop at any time, pick it up another time. And so I'm going to stop for now, and I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to pick it up hopefully tomorrow. Let's see if I can make this a regular thing. So I don't think anybody's been watching this. Fail to connect to server. Awesome. Okay, so I've got a copy and disk anyway, so I'll upload this on my own. So cheers.